Well, now, I am to talk about cause and effect at this point, because that's where the previous video ended, saying that that's what I was going to do. And before getting to that, I made a couple of notes here about things I wanted to say first. They're just notes, so I'm not sure what I was going to, I don't have it worded out exactly. So let's see what happens. I wrote here to mention something about regardless of your involvement and purity of motives. Now that you've done your motives work and you're beginning to employ it, that you can be taken by others to have ill motives, nonetheless. Well, I know that from personal experience. Let's say I go to work and I have ethical motives. I have, let's say, my employer's best interests in mind. I have motives that involve, the betterment of everything around me. To the best of my ability, that's what's going on in my thinking, and I may carry it forth with some action in accordance with these motives, and have it all get misconstrued by somebody else, let's say my employer, and be accused of trying to rip him off or being, up to something with no specific thing mentioned about what it is that I'm supposedly up to. But, one thing that can happen or make this kind of thing take place, aside from one of the chief causes of misunderstandings being people having differing sets or inconsistent sets of mental images going on in their minds about how things work. Habitual mental images about how things work. Let's say person A has a certain set and it's not very consistent with person B's set of such matters. And so actions may be perceived by person A, person B's actions or things they say, things that person B says to person A, or actions that person B does, can be perceived by person A as being completely different, especially with respect to what the motives were behind those actions or those words, or what the meaning of what person B says, what the meanings of what he's saying or she is saying really are, can be perceived as being something entirely different than what they really were, because of a different set or inconsistent set of mental images that are in place. And people often assume that they know full well what another person's motives are, such that, let's say, let's just relate this to how we have knowledge of other people's minds, the so-called other people's minds. We generally we tend to compare what's going on in their mind with what kinds of things go on in our minds. We assume that they have the same general mental, somebody else has the same general mental constitution or methods of operation that we do. And sometimes this gets carried a little too far when assuming that we understand somebody else's motives, because we may see what they're doing, actions that they're engaging in, and we compare that with, we read in their motives because we're comparing those actions with what our motives would be if we were carrying out those actions. So I said, if we carried out actions X, Y, and Z, we would be doing it because of motives R, S, and T. So we assume that because we see this other person carrying out actions X, Y, and Z, that their motives must be R, S, and T. We could be completely wrong. And that can happen. That can happen when you have, let's say, purified your motives and you are acting in correspondence with them. You're reading your LOM, list of motivating goals, every day, and they are becoming, and they were engraved right into your will, and you're reinforcing that engraving every day, and you're starting to act consciously in accordance with them throughout your day. Let's say you're intentionally going about your activities and your thoughts throughout the day in accordance with those motives, such that perhaps if you are engaging in an action that you cannot link to any one of those motives, then you don't engage in that action, or you find a way to link it. If it's an action that you must perform, you find a way to link it. And the more we do that consciously, the more we are incorporating those motivating goals into our daily activities. And also, this is happening at a very deep level and at every level in between, because of all of the things we've done up to this point here, and our conscious employment of those motives throughout the day. And one thing that I encourage you to do, something that is, I'm going to suggest it strongly, one of my strong suggestions. Whenever you perform an action, learn to make it a habit. Learn to make it a habit that you call to the fore of your mind your motives. The ones that are in your list, the ones that you are working with, such that as your habit to do this forms, all of your activities and all of your thinking are in accordance with those motives. Now, this, of course, is going to be happening at the subconscious level, and from there it will become a more and more conscious thing, but also intentionally doing it consciously approaches the same matter from the conscious end of the scale. All right, so let's say you're going along with these motives that you have purified and transmuted, and these are your motives, and you're acting in accordance with them. Well, these are probably a different sort of motives, carried out to a much greater extent than the average person, than most people act from and think from, or in accordance with. And so your motives may be very misconstrued just because they're different. They're unusual. So actions that you perform, other people may ascribe motives to you that just are not consistent with the ones you have, because your motives are actually different than the usual ones, and some people may tend to downgrade their perception of your motives from the normal run of motives going on in humanity, rather than consider that they might be more refined than the average. Especially if the person making the judgment, him or herself, does not have highly refined motives. They won't even know that such motives are possible. I mean, they may conceptually know it, but it's not the sort of thing that in their perception they run into. I'm just pointing all of this out to let you know that regardless of your actual motives, now that you have evolved them, and along with that evolvement, you and what you do, what you think, and how you feel, how you perceive, how you are, Your way of being is evolving. Doesn't mean, that everybody's going to catch on. No. No. All right. That having been said, another thing that I wrote here is mention something about motives at work in everyday life with respect to these direct insights of laws and evolution toward direct experience of true selfhood when going about affairs with these motives held to the fore throughout the day, and with them engraved, and also with them engraved right into the will, which controls energy toward the achievement of these ethical goals. Well, what would I say about that? I kind of already did address that. Keeping these motives to the fore. When engaging in an activity, link it to one of your motives, or recall a motive and then go into the action. It's not that hard to do. I mean, these motives already, these motivating goals are you're very familiar with them. And by now, you have manipulated them in all sorts of ways, but they are at their highest point, and like I said before, just an aside here, if there are any that you need to add in, any goals that you need to add in, go ahead and do so and follow the same, procedure as in the original creation of them, of your list. But recall your motives intentionally. Recall your motives throughout the day. Recall a motive that drives you to action, and then go into some action with that motive in mind. That's another way to implement this into your daily activity. Do it intentionally. Link everything you do to your motives, or to some motive. Anything that you're doing, link it to a motive. Then that will give you enough. All of the ways that this is working, I could make an entire video, an hour or two, out of just describing all the different ways, things that this does. So one thing it does is, it increases your interest in what you're doing, which will help you place your attention on what you're doing, which is important too. Keeping your attention on what you're doing. I've talked about that before. All of these affairs work together, right? They're all part of one thing happening, just different aspects of it. All of these different aspects are things to bear in mind, but also understand that they're aspects of one whole thing happening constantly. It all works, a way to describe how all of this works is cause and effect. And so now I'll talk about cause and effect. Why not, right? The law of cause and effect seems rather self-explanatory. Most of us are familiar with it as a physical plane principle, or as it manifests or shows itself physically, is a more accurate way to state it. We might recall Newton's laws of motion and recall the proverbial, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. But there's far more to it than laws of physical motion. The law applies at all planes, and an aspect of the law is cause and effect. The physical laws are instantiations of cause and effect. The physical plane exists as a result of the higher planes. And when I say result, that's an effect, right? I'm talking about an effect. To say that each plane is a condensation of the next higher one is to speak simply and roughly, but not far from the truth. Each universal law and principle applies to all planes, right? Because the laws governing one plane carry over into the more condensed plane proceeding from it. Notice again that this applies not only to the law of cause and effect, but also to vibration, polarity, and so forth. Accordingly, I have spoken of the law of mental attraction. It's common to refer to it as a mental law because it serves us well to understand its deliberate mental uses. But the term law of mental attraction refers to an instantiation of the universal law of attraction, just as the physically manifesting law of cause and effect is an instantiation of the universal law of cause and effect. Much can be said about cause and effect. I give particular attention to it right here partly because it seems to be, as I said at the end of the immediately previous video, it seems to be all the rage because it appears so obviously fundamental to our lives. And some of its action can be visibly seen. One important thing to point out is that our modern scientism conception of it, merely having to do with events sequences, is feeble, limited, and even involves an element of fallacy. That element being roughly the problem of infinite causal regress and infinite causal progress. If you're familiar with that, okay, and if you're not, I'll just briefly explain. The problem of infinite causal regress is if we want to trace back the causes of things, let's say event A. What is the cause of event A, we might ask? Well, okay, it was some preceding cause on our current conception of causation. Usually a cause comes before the effect, right? Okay, so regardless of whether we're considering coming before, I'll just say came before to make this easy. Okay, so the cause of event A is some event that came before A. We might pinpoint it and then want to know, well, what caused that? And so we trace this back, keep going and keep going. Now let's turn this into just a conceptual mental exercise here. How far back do we go with this chain of cause and effect? Well, it conceptually just keeps on going. It never ends. We want to get to the original cause, and it doesn't happen. It's an infinite regress. Well, the same if we fast forward from event A, considering it to be a cause, so it causes event B, which causes event C, which causes event D. How far does that extend? Conceptually, forever. It's an infinite thing. But we want to figure out that, well, see, that gives us a problem because there must be some cause that caused all of the causes. All right? But even that, if we get our finger on that cause, well, then what caused it? So we're just in the same problem again, just at a different level of it. So our modern scientism conception of causation, merely of it having to do with events sequences, is feeble, limited, and even involves an element of fallacy. And we can figure that there must be some fallacy, some element of fallacious thinking about it, because the problem of infinite causal regress and causal progress slips in. So there must be a problem with our thinking about it like that. Aristotle had a more complete conception of causation than our contemporary one. In his attempt to delineate the essence of reality, he analyzed change, which necessitated his analysis of causation. And he laid down 4 distinct kinds of causes. Kinds of cause, or modes of causation. They were called the material, the formal, the final, and the efficient. There is a material cause, a formal cause, a final cause, and an efficient cause. And each event has all 4. Today, we maintain only one kind of cause, which in terms of Aristotle causes is a rough combination of two of his, the material and the efficient. And it's usually referred to as proximal cause. That's not to say that Aristotle was wrong or right, but that the narrow viewfinder of modern scientism only allows for that one. When we consider the universal law of cause and effect, we have to be ready to broaden our scope of understanding. Cause and effect easily appears to have an encompassing aspect with respect to the other universal laws. The other ones could easily be seen as sub-laws of it. Could. It'd be pretty easy to come to that point of view. But, but then the same applies to the law of opposites, which we have referred to with the principle or law of polarity. That principle being inherent to two opposites. We could say the same thing about it, that it's really the fundamental one going on among the set of universal laws, that the other ones are sub-laws of it. Well, which one is the fundamental one? That becomes hard to say. It depends on your point of view at the moment, really. The Taoists say that polarity is the fundamental one among the two, cause and effect and polarity, and among certain others, the polarity is the fundamental. Other people say that cause and effect is fundamental to polarity. Others say that some other one is more fundamental. Really, what's fundamental is just the law, the one law. And these are all of which these laws are aspects or delineations of, right? I mean, we've already talked about that rather extensively. But back to the program here. Really, they all work together, and again, are aspects of one law at work. The only law that is indubitably fundamental to, or metaphysically, ontologically, and logically prior to the rest, is the one law of laws. Cause and effect takes place along lines between poles. Now, this is the same concept that I was referring to in the previous video. Cause and effect can happen because of poles. When I was talking about polarity and motion, I was talking about lines between poles. Well, cause and effect, plays right in here. And again, it's linked right up with polarity. So here's where the discussion between, about which one of the two is the fundamental one. Well, cause and effect can happen because of poles. Motion between poles involves changes of vibration and so on. But again, cause and effect seems to take on primary importance to us for various reasons, which in large can be conceptually approached by referring to sub-laws of cause and effect. And one of those is karma. But back to the immediately previous point. Motion between poles involving changes of vibration, is going to take place in accordance with cause and effect. Those changes. Any change is going to involve it's going to both be a cause and an effect. Cause and effect is at work right in all those changes, in any change. In vibration itself, there's cause and effect at work. Okay? Now, in large can be conceptually approached by referring to sub-laws of cause and effect. One of those is karma. And the term sub-law is a real inexact term. Okay? Karma, let's say, is a special case of cause and effect. It's cause and effect across incarnations. And therefore, we humans use the term largely with respect to humans. I mean, when it comes to natural laws of motion, like Newton's laws of motion, we usually call that cause and effect. We don't call that, any operation along those lines, karma. We generally are using the term karma with respect to humans. And many people more broadly use the term karma to denote cause and effect at work within a single incarnation. Like, you do something today, and tomorrow there's an effect from it. And if it's a negative one, or what a so-called negative effect, all right? Somebody may say, well, that's your karma, Look what you did yesterday, see? Karma's a bitch. Well, that's a rather pedestrian way of looking at karma, because really karma is cause and effect across incarnations. And I am going to post material about how that works. And it's rather complex, and it does certainly involve thought forms. But once again, back to the program at hand. Many people more broadly use the term karma to denote cause and effect at work within a single incarnation. And then in that case, karma just means cause and effect with respect to humans, period, and to no other thing than humans. It's a pedestrian use of the word karma, like I said. Another let's say, aspect of cause and effect is the law of retribution, which you might have heard of. Well, I want you to see it as an aspect of cause and effect. It's just one aspect of cause and effect, the law of retribution. And talking about these different aspects of cause and effect help us to understand, or to broaden our understanding of cause and effect. The law of retribution. This aspect of cause and effect also refers largely to human life. Roughly, it is just what it implies, the retributive aspect of cause and effect. You may someday come across reference to this law. You might hear about it, the law of retribution. Well, just when you do, understand that it's an aspect of cause and effect, kind of like a special case of cause and effect. And recall also, when you come across it, that it is mostly a theologically rooted term. It involves the apparent function of cause and effect to mete out, or to dish out, reward and punishment, to administer reward and punishment. But it's cause and effect nonetheless. Cause and effect does not involve reward or punishment per se. The more accurate view is that cause and effect always provides what is due. Every person reaps what he sows. It's really just the mechanics of the one law at work. Really, ultimately, right? We know that now. People who embrace the law of retribution and get caught up in the theological quagmire then of an evil God, because, if punishment is given, well, then that gets involved with the whole idea of suffering, and then you have this kind of like, how do you explain this God that gets us all mixed up with suffering and punishing when his God is supposed to be good? And we get into some theological problems. One of the big ones, the problem of suffering, and the idea that, what does God have to do with evil? God's not supposed to be evil. But then how do you explain evil and punishment? It just becomes a mess. This whole idea of being thrown into hell, oh goodness. It's all part of the law of retribution, you see, a theologically rooted term That denotes an aspect, a theologically rooted aspect of cause and effect. Moving forward in the conception from law of retribution involves a coming to understand the truth in the maxim, we aren't punished for our sins, we're punished by them. That's one way to make a little step out of the quagmire involved with the law of retribution, or adhering to or subscribing to it and its actions. But nonetheless, there is a retributive aspect to cause and effect. Yes, if we look at it from that point of view, yes, that is happening. But once again, kind of, try to get a grip on what's really going on. It's cause and effect at work. A less theological and more generally applicable name for the seemingly retributive aspect of cause and effect is called the law of compensation, which you may have heard of or will run across at some point. That is a less theological name for this aspect, this retributive or seemingly retributive aspect of cause and effect. And it's a more generally applicable term for this seemingly retributive aspect of cause and effect. The law of compensation. Once again, it's cause and effect. And it's the pointing out that cause and effect has a compensating effect. See, that's less theological than retribution. It has a compensating effect. But retribution aside, everything that happens is what is due and what is needed and what is deserved. Putting the whole idea of retribution aside. Everything that happens is what is due and what is needed and what is deserved. In an orderly fashion and in a sequential fashion. See, this is important to understand, that everything that happens is what is due and what is needed and what is deserved. To view things, to view affairs from a higher point of view than that which gets us caught up in the ideas of suffering and things not working the way they should work, and something having gone wrong, and hardship, and oh my goodness, all that sort of thing. We come to understand that everything that happens is what is due and what is needed and what is deserved. We're looking at things from a higher point of view, and it is so much easier than to get above the idea of hardship, suffering, evil, and that stuff that keeps us trapped in lower vibrations of thought, lower states of consciousness about affairs. It's an evolved way of looking at things. And that's what we're after here, right? So, understanding that the law of cause and effect is infallible, and its compensating effect involves dueness, necessity, and what is deserved. Everything that happens is what is due, and is what is needed, and is what is deserved. Everything that happens is what is needed because cause and effect always works in accordance with the law inherent in universal will, which, as you will recall, works toward the evolution of all things. And we call that motion the law of evolution, which you may run across or you may have heard. It's called the law of evolution because of its universal constancy. So think of that universal constancy of evolution in connection with cause and effect. It always works in accordance with the law inherent in universal will, which, as you will recall, works toward the evolution of all things. It works, the motion involved in it can be called the law of evolution when we look at it from that point of view. So insofar as cause and effect is an aspect of the law, it always works toward evolution, cause and effect. Even when we by free will act disharmoniously with universal will, cause and effect inescapably acts upon us to redirect. If only we could always comprehend that, we would then have transcended at all times the idea of things going afoul, of some kind of evil going on, far from any concept of some, questions over how in the world can God be all good and then, get us mixed up in evil, or how do you explain that evil even exists, and, punishment, and far from that kind of idea, very far from any of that kind of idea, but, far also from notions that things are going foul and misfortune, all of these kinds of negative ideas about affairs, and their opposite connotations, that things are, something went right, that kind of thing, It's cause and effect, and it always works toward evolution. So when we by free will act disharmoniously with universal will, all right, in other words, against evolvement, cause and effect acts upon us to redirect. And what we will have noticed, if we are, down at the normal average, lower consciousness, plane of thought, we will perceive hardship, suffering, pain. We don't want that anymore, right? No. We need to be understanding then is that it is evolvement happening. It's the redirection of pointing us in the right direction. They're telling us that we're headed off in, against betterment, against evolvement. If we're feeling this pain, but let's just get above that too. Pain, pleasure, all of it. Get into the mindset of the mechanics that involves the mechanics of the laws at work. And understanding a real-time, everyday involvement in the rigors of everyday life, understanding of the laws at work. And your true self in it, what you really are in the whole picture. And then it's one thing going on, and you're not separate, and all of the rest that we've already gone through. Approaching affairs, comprehending affairs, and becoming better and better at making this our mindset. It helps us with what we have called employing the greater key to affairs. If only we could always comprehend That when we, by our will, our use of will, start heading off in the wrong direction, in other words, not in accordance with the direction that that universal will is trying to push us, cause and effect inescapably acts upon us to redirect. It's the cosmos doing its thing. It's the universe doing its thing through you. That's what's happening. There's been no fall from that taking place. The universe doing its thing through you. And here you came along, and got something, trying to go in the other direction. So it tries to redirect you. And that redirection, that causal redirection, feels like pain if we are in the consciousness of pain. When we are in the consciousness of our true self and laws at work, fundamental laws in operation, then our whole perception is different. Our whole perception of affairs is different. Remember, we said that's what will happen. Our whole perception will be different. Our whole way of looking at things will be different. Yes, we may still feel physical pain. Yes, that's an action of our nervous system, right? But how we view it, our whole idea about that sensation is different. It doesn't need to lead to depression, anxiety, fear, any of these lower emotions, lower thoughts about it. At all. No. Again, cause and effect always provides necessary effects. And that's also purely logical. Purely logical. Cause and effect always provides necessary effects. A sufficient cause produces a necessary effect. The term sufficient refers to all that it takes to make something happen. Let's say, a sufficient condition is what it takes to make something happen. A necessary condition is one that is required. So consider this now with these terms, sufficient and necessary, with respect to cause and effect. A sufficient cause being a cause that's all that it takes, just what it takes to produce an effect, it will provide a necessary effect, one that must happen. Given the sufficient cause, all that it takes to make it happen, if all that it takes to make event A happen is in place, then event A must happen. Right? That's logical. That's just logic. So again, cause and effect always provides necessary effects. A sufficient cause produces a necessary effect. And when we say, if X, then Y. When we say that, that's what we're getting. That's what we're saying. It's just a shorter version of it. A sufficient cause produces a necessary effect. A sufficient cause produces a necessary effect. Y, in that statement, if X, then Y, Y is the necessary condition. If X, then Y. Because if X, then Y is necessarily the case. That's the logic behind it. And cause and effect always provides what is deserved. That's another way to say that it provides what is due and what is needed. What is necessary? What is due? What must be? Saying that it provides what is deserved is another way to say that it provides what is due and what is needed. So the idea of deserving something, when seen rightly, right thinking about it, is that what it really means, what it really refers to, regardless of how people use the term, is that it is what is due and what is needed. Now, this is important with our work in everyday life. What is happening in other people's lives when you encounter them, if it appears to be tragic, is not. Except upon perception from the lower planes, where the idea of tragic is the real thing. Yeah, in the lower plane thinking, yeah, such and such is tragic. But we're getting above that, right? What is happening in people's lives, if we involve more lucidly perceived facts of the case, is that what is happening is what is due and what is needed and what is deserved. Every apparent tragedy serves to redirect what is due, what is needed, and what is deserved if it involves some kind of, on a lower plane's perception, some kind of tragedy, pain, suffering, or whatever. It's cause and effect redirecting. Every apparent non-tragedy serves to direct. And when I say apparent tragedy or apparent non-tragedy, I mean apparent. What's really going on is directing and redirecting. Always in the direction of evolution. Whether it's direction or redirection, the overall plan and plot, remember, is evolution. Law of evolution. It's called a law because of its universal constancy, okay? So it's always at work. Apply your logic to see that the actual direction is always the same. Whether it's direction or redirection, the actual direction of movement in either case is always the same. It may be helpful to adopt the relevant view that every apparent tragedy and non-tragedy alike serve to benefit. You see, the law is infallible. This is useful to you or in your work because you must come to understand the same principle at work in your life. Not just how you view other things, other people's lives, what's happening to them. Same thing is at work in your life. And really, when we rise to an even higher level of discourse, the distinction between their life and yours really blurs, doesn't it? You remember. There are so many different ways to get at that, and we've talked about it to some extent here. I want you to not leave that state of mind that we have established. Stay with it when thinking about the rest of this here. Use each of these ways of talking about the one great thing that's happening as, enhancements to the other ways of talking about it and thinking about it. Let them build on each other here. See that happening. See it happening and feel the change that it makes in you. That's the experience. That's experience. Direct experience. Everything that happens to you in your dealings with other people is your due and what you need and what you deserve. And your dealings with other people involves what's happening to them. So the distinction between adopting this point of view that we're getting at here, to what happens to other people and to what happens to you, the distinction between those two things really blurs too. Because what happens to you when you encounter other people involves what's happening to them, and vice versa. It becomes very good to invoke here once again the idea of seeing eye to eye. If you understand this, and keep in mind that the whole end is evolution, then you'll understand that every experience is therefore and part of your evolution. If you relatively fail to evolve from an experience, then you'll remain in the same place, so to speak. Excuse me. If you relatively fail to evolve from an experience, then you're going to remain in the same place, so to speak, with respect to cause and effect. That is, in that case, you're going to get another shot at it with an evolutionarily equivalent experience sometime later. Because the law is infallible. If you react to an experience in a negative manner, you have any negative thought about some experience that you're having or somebody else is having, then you have, so to speak, devolved with respect to that experience. And you have added more to the negatively retributive aspect of cause and effect. To whatever extent an experience of even somebody else is your experience, let's say you have you react in a negative manner, and this applies, to greater extent, to greater degree, to an experience of your own, something that's happening with you. You end up still having an equivalent experience coming later. Plus one that is the result of your negative response. Because you haven't evolved. Plus you had a negative, you threw in a negative thing. So you're going to have an experience coming later that's the result of it. And of course the same is going to apply if you have a positive response. But it'll be along a positive line. But back to, if you react to an experience in a negative manner, then you have, so to speak, devolved with respect to that experience, and you've added more to the negatively retributive aspect of cause and effect with respect to you, and you end up still having an equivalent experience coming later, plus one that is the result of your negative response. The general movement is relative temporary setback. Relative, remember? As a necessary step in accordance with the law of evolution. So even then, it's still part of evolution. The setback is a relative one, and it's temporary, as a necessary, due, and deserved affair in accordance with the law of evolution, which, remember, is an aspect, or it's all wrapped up in cause and effect, and universal will. All part of the one law at work. If, however, you respond such that you evolve, then you add to the positively retributive aspect of cause and effect. Remember, I mentioned that. It works either way. And your experience moves forward. No matter what, you get what is your due, and what you need, and what you deserve, all in the course of evolution. if we carry this idea to its extreme, then the whole concept of evil takes on a totally different meaning. This is a point to arrive at. Like I said, from a higher plane of consciousness perspective, these affairs are seen in a totally different way. If you want to engage in the lower plane view of things, go ahead. Be my guest. But personal evolution is what we're after, right? And the lower plane perspective, the lower vibration consciousness perspective that we engage in over any of these affairs, the more we're going to get wrapped up in lower plane consciousness in general, by way of cause and effect, and all the other laws at work, which is movement away from direct awareness of true selfhood. That's important to know. One of the best practical views to have about all of your experiences is the alchemical. If you look for the real experience, mentally delineating its category of experience from others, for example, is some experience involved? Is it work drudgery? Is it domestic provisioning? Is it spiritual in category? What category is it? And then recognize the true metal in it that can provide you with evolution. And then look for or create its categorical balance with other categories of experience. In other words, if it's of the spiritual nature, if some experience is of the spiritual category, well, what balance is that? What kind of experience, what category will balance that? Look for the balancing thing. What other experience can be brought into bear at some point, around the same time in your life that provides a balance so that things remain balanced. What other area of life needs some attention? If you're having a particularly spiritual event going on, what will balance that? What can you bring into your life to balance it, right? To keep things from getting lopsided. If it's domestic provisioning, like putting a new carpet in your house, or getting a new pet, or loving your pet. What is the thing that will balance that? We'll talk more about that at some other time. But you can kind of imagine it, make it up, what would balance out work drudgery? What kind of thing might that be? Domestic provisioning? Something material? Something that involves, gratefulness, something involving yourself with something that over which you're grateful. There are more specific ways to talk about what categories balance out what other categories, and we'll get to that at another time. But if you look for the real experience by mentally delineating its category of experience from others, and then recognize the true metal in it that can provide you with evolution, and then look for or create its categorical balance with another category of experience, and then additionally purify the experience by turning it into a clear and positive concept, right? And adjust all of your conscious thoughts and emotions accordingly, and then transmute it to the higher mental plane by considering how you can use that experience to instrument your duty to universal will and therefore to humanity and life. And then appeal to your subconscious mind to work in those directions, and then follow through. Well, you'll end up having applied the law of cause and effect in your life experiences in accordance with the law. I better read all of that to you again, right? Because I want you to get this, and I want you to write it down. Because you don't have this in writing. I do. You don't. One of the best practical views to have about all of your experiences is the alchemical way of talking about it, and you are familiar with that. Now, with respect to life experiences, you cannot transmute an experience into personal evolution until, really, from this point of view, it is purified. Remember that? Purification must happen first. But also balanced then. Balanced. Right? Balanced. Then it can be transmuted. So if you look for the real experience, get to the real metal of it. First, figure out what kind of experience it is, what category it belongs to, so that you can balance it. And then look for the true metal in it. Once you have the balance achieved, some sense of balance achieved, because that stops the movements going on from one extreme to another with respect to it. It brings it toward a point of balance between poles. All right? It's balanced out. It's kind of polarized to a, the clamor of it is calmed down through balance. Then you can see it more clearly. You recognize the true metal in it that can provide you with evolution. Is it a directing experience? Is it a redirecting experience? What is going to be your role with that experience to move in a growth manner, an inner growth manner, an evolving manner? In accordance with your motives and your motivating goals, right? Then look for or create its categorical balance, like I said. I already said that, I'm sorry. Additionally, purify it by turning it into a clear and positive concept. I just said that too. And adjust then all your conscious thoughts and emotions accordingly. Right? Intentionally and with attention, adjust your thinking in accordance with what you now have figured out, and your emotions. Call into play a motive, a motivating goal. Link it right in. And transmute that experience now, the real metal of it, to the higher mental plane by considering how you can use that experience. Remember I said for growth or evolvement? Well, here's an explication of that. Use that experience to instrument your duty to universal will and therefore to humanity and life. Consider how you can use that experience in that direction. What would you have to do to carry through with that from that experience? What is it that is pointing you toward doing? What would satisfy this condition, of instrumenting your duty to universal will and therefore to humanity and life? How do you use that experience? What direction is it pointing you in as your duty to universal will and therefore to humanity and life. So how will this help you grow that is going to be good for everything, everybody, in a sense, to life? Not just for you, not not the self-centered you thing, no. Think universally. And then appeal to your subconscious mind, and you know how to do that, right? Pictures in your head, statements to go with it, feeling the meaning of each word, feeling the change within you. Pushing it down into your brainstem, opening yourself to it, letting it sink in, going down through your spine, out through your body, feeling the change that it makes. Make a picture of it going into your subconscious mind. To work in those directions, and then you follow through. Having done all that with an experience, you end up having applied the law of cause and effect in your life experiences in accordance with the law. That's the alchemical way of going about it. Take an experience, decide what general category it belongs to, balance the category, not right then necessarily, just as a general, way of going about life. Okay? Don't get off too far in any one specific category, in other words, without balancing it out. This keeps it all going together, calms down the clamor of any one direction too far, any extremes. Okay? So you're arriving at a point at poise, at the point of balance among experiences, right? Then you can find the real metal in the experience by asking, what do I need? What do I do now with this experience that will cause me to better serve humanity and life? Why would you do that? Because it's your duty to universal will. You are an instrument of it. Therefore, and then when you appeal to your subconscious mind to work in those directions and you follow through, therefore, by cause and effect, right? You have ended up applying the law of cause and effect in your life experiences in accordance with the law. That makes sense, right? This is far greater in effect than simply what we would call learning from your experiences. We're really taking charge of that in this manner. I mean, the idea of, you learn from your experiences or you learn from your mistakes, that's just letting it up to the slow course of evolution that has no real, intentional use of will toward that end. No, we're taking charge, right? Remember, we're taking charge. And that is our duty. And once we realize that is our duty, then we don't want to miss the boat, right? We've talked about that. So this kind of procedure is this kind of way of going about things, this way of being, is far greater in effect than simply the old learning from your experiences, which often amounts to comparative triteness and frequently takes place in the proverbial metaphorical school of hard knocks, if it gets accomplished at all. The school of hard knocks, is an assumed lower plane institution where the teacher still whacks children's fingers with a ruler. No matter how we talk about the law of cause and effect, no matter how we talk about it, compensation, retribution, whatever, karma. We can see that it works in a balancing manner. And there is a law of balance. And we talked about balance when we just talked about this alchemical way of going about things when it comes to life experiences. We can see how that it works in a balancing manner. And if we look closely, we see it at work in all things. You probably know that the heart organ, for example, in addition to pumping blood, functions to maintain homeostasis or balance in the circulatory system. A cause produces an effect in the functioning of the heart toward balance or rest. It's just, an example of seeing it at work in all things. Notice that the law of cause and effect is at work in everything. You can go back through what I've been saying here the last 20 minutes or so and look for its instantiations all the way through. Look for it. Go back and listen through. I mean it. I mean, if you're really actively participating in all of this here, go back through, listen to something, pause the video, and find the law of cause and effect at work in what's been said. These instantiations of cause and effect run throughout. So find them. Get familiar with the territory here. Really. Examine it. This is your evolution. This is your achievement with it. And if you don't feel like going back and doing that, but you think maybe you should, to get the most out of it, remember, we're taking all of this stuff to its limits. Pushing it as far as possible. Right? This isn't just some intellectual exercise or something to listen to and then think, oh, well, okay, I did that. No, you didn't. So if we want to actually develop a totally different mindset, a new way of being, a higher plane, I don't just mean a relatively higher, I mean we want to get our conscious awareness and our way of being involved with the higher planes, not the lower planes. Right? Get that greater key activated. Okay? In connection with our, establishment, realization, actualization of true selfhood. Then go back and do this. Get very, very intimately familiar with this stuff at work. So go back through here and notice that the law of cause and effect is at work in everything. Find its instantiations right here in the stuff that's said. Run through a little bit of it. Pause. Consider what's been said. And find cause and effect at work right there. Go find those instantiations. And if you're going to push it to the limit, every time you see a law of cause and effect at work in what's been said, feel the change that understanding or that recognition makes in you. Feel it. And picture what's being said. All right? Feeling the effect is getting real intimate with the law of cause and effect. When you're looking for the cause and effect in everything that's being discussed about the law of cause and effect, and then you're feeling the effect. How can you go wrong? Now, I want to point something else out, and I'm going to wing this here because I'm done with what I wrote about cause and effect. But I want to talk about something else. I mean, really relevant to it. See, I want to talk to you a little bit about my personal experience here with this material that I'm posting with respect to cause and effect. All right? I have to be careful, and this is going to relate to you and your motives and your personal involvement and your true selfhood and your involvement through incarnations and your actual, not just your direct experience of true selfhood, but your involvement through the planes, through the journey of your soul, let's say, in the journey of your soul. I have to be careful here about my connection with cause and effect in presenting all of this material to you. You see, my duty is to universal law. Which pushes for the involvement of the one whole thing. And we've talked about, we've talked about that in various ways. Many ways. Now, of course, this involves, the betterment of humanity. So I'm doing something here which I take to be for the betterment of humanity, for the sake of humanity, as my duty to universal law. The thing I have to be careful of is to not be attached, is attachment with the results of my action. If I have any attachment, if I'm doing this at all for the result, like to help you evolve, that's my intended result, if that's what I'm really after, then I'm tied to cause and effect. Very closely tied to the pendulum swing of cause and effect. I am tied to the results of my actions. And part of that tie is emotional, right? And intellectual. And therefore keeps me tied to the lower planes. The astral, the mental, which are all wrapped up around physical incarnation. If I have concern over whether this material will help somebody, I'm still tied in like that. If I hope that people get it, I'm still tied in like that. If I get a little beyond that, and I consider that, hey, I'm doing this because this produces good karma for me, I'm still tied in like that. I'm still tied into karma that has to do with intellect, emotion, lower plane activity. So I am within the pendulum swing of cause and effect. And as long as I am there, instead of poised at the top of the pendulum, I'm still swinging in here, down in here. And I am tied to the wheel of reincarnation. If I have, as one of my motives or desires here with any of this, the effect of no longer reincarnating physically, then I'm still tied in. So I must keep very closely in mind that I am doing this because it's what I can do. That is my duty to universal law. Not as, not for the result of my own personal growth or yours. I am applying laws, you see, and I know what they do. I know the effects they will have, but I can't be doing this for the effects. I don't want to be tied to them. I want to rise above that, those ties. But I can't be doing this in order to, for the effect of rising above them, because that still ties me in. That's an effect. I don't want to be tied to that. And saying I don't want to still ties me in. Do you see where I'm going with this? To really evolve, we pretty much have to give up this attachment to evolving. The only way to do that, right, is to establish true selfhood, understand the laws, see them at work in everything, work with them, let universal law work through us, understand that it is universal will working through us, that our idea of separateness from it is fallacious, and act in accordance with universal law as our duty to do that. And that's it. Understanding that in acting in accordance with our duty with universal law, we are acting in accordance with the law of evolution, which pushes toward the evolution of all things, and that involves humanity for us, because that's what we're most attached with here, what we're most linked in with. Remember, universal law, universal will flowing through its focal point, the individual, to the other focal points, and back to all. Therefore, that involves acting toward the betterment of humanity, but not for the result of it. Not being attached to that result. If it helps, it helps. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That is beyond your control. My control. That has nothing to do with me unless I make it have something to do with me, which ties me into the wheel of reincarnation. Because I have desires, I will be acting upon desires that link me in with the causal wheel that involves sensory information and effects that are tied in with the physical plane simply by the fact of the fact that this is taking place physically. This is a physical plane experience happening. I'm talking onto the internet, trying to, get information to you. And there are so many ways to talk about this. And when we get to the karma part later, in a later video, when we see really how karma works, which remember is a special case of cause and effect, and we see what it has to do with thought forms and a life cycle in the wheel of the cycle of incarnation, right? This will make a lot more sense. What I'm saying right now. So I was talking about me. I want you to apply it to you. While we're talking about cause and effect here. Do your duty and not because of the effects. Just your duty. That requires a point of poise. Which we talked about here. All right. Next, we'll talk about rhythm. The flow and the power. Feeling the great romance. Metal meddling. The big bad wolf. Controlling the beast. And then some final notes. And this conceptual theory interlude, after having created your list of motivating goals, will be done. And we'll get on to further action. Although all of this is action. Be well.